The sky over Borno State erupted in fire and thunder early Friday morning as Nigerian Air Force jets swooped down on their targets, their precision strikes marking yet another chapter in Nigeria's relentless war against terror. More than 40 terrorists were neutralized in coordinated close air support and air interdiction operations at Azir and Musaram areas of Borno, disrupting planned attacks and bolstering ongoing ground operations. This wasn't just another routine military operation, it was a carefully orchestrated strike that will send shockwaves through the terrorist networks that have plagued this northeastern state for over a decade. The intelligence that triggered these strikes painted an alarming picture of what could have been a devastating assault on civilian populations. NAFA assets carried out a successful air interdiction at Musaram in the Tumbun's general area after intelligence revealed terrorists assembling on canoes to launch attacks along the Baga and Fish Dam axis. On arrival, the aircraft sighted about 10 canoes and over 40 suspected terrorists. Picture the scene. Dawn breaking over the waters, terrorist fighters believing themselves hidden as they prepared their assault, unaware that eyes in the sky had already marked them for destruction. What unfolded next was a masterclass in modern warfare coordination. The terrorists were engaged in multiple passes, throwing them into disarray. Some fleeing elements were trailed and neutralized, while others who regrouped at an assembly area were also engaged, effectively dismantling the terrorist concentration. The Air Force pilots didn't just strike once and leave, they methodically hunted down fleeing fighters, denying them any chance to regroup or escape to fight another day. But this wasn't happening in isolation. As the airstrikes rained down on Musaram on January 15, another crisis was brewing in Azir. In the early hours of January 16, NAF aircraft swiftly responded to a distress report at Azir, where troops were engaged with terrorists withdrawing from the area. Ground forces were locked in fierce combat with ISWAP fighters who had launched a bold attack on the military base there. If you are finding this coverage valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe for more breaking news from Nigeria's security frontlines. The Azir attack revealed just how desperate and determined these terrorist groups have become. Parts of the base's defensive perimeter were initially breached, noting that troops with support from the air component of Operation Hadinkai and other army aerial platforms repelled the attack after a firefight that lasted over an hour. The terrorists came equipped with heavy weapons, including rocket-propelled grenades that damaged military vehicles and even the base's CCTV control room. Yet, despite the intensity of the assault, the combination of ground resistance and air support proved overwhelming for the attackers. Further scans revealed terrorist elements attempting to regroup under nearby tree cover, prompting precise and successive airstrikes that neutralized several of them. This detail reveals the sophisticated technology at play here. Modern surveillance equipment allowed the Air Force to track terrorists even as they sought cover, turning what would have been safe havens in previous conflicts into death traps. The aftermath of these operations tells its own story of success. Troops retained control of the base and recovered several weapons and ammunition, including a 60mm mortar tube, mortar bombs, locally fabricated explosives, heavy machine gun rounds, and hundreds of rounds of 7.62mm NATO ammunition. These weren't just ragtag fighters with outdated weapons, they were well-armed combatants with military-grade equipment, making their neutralization all the more significant. The operations were conducted on January 15 and 16 by the air component of Operation Hadinkai, following actionable intelligence and in close coordination with troops in contact. Operation Hadinkai, which means hold hands together in Hausa, represents the military's current strategy of combining air power, ground forces, and intelligence gathering to combat terrorism in the northeast. This week's success demonstrates how effective this coordination can be when executed properly. The strategic importance of these areas cannot be overstated. Azir and Musaram, located in Damboa local government area of Borno, have long been hotspots of persistent insecurity stemming from the operations of Boko Haram and its splinter group ISWAP. Troops around Wajiroko in Azir Multe were ambushed in November 2025, killing soldiers and civilian Joint Task Force members, including the execution of a captured Brigadier General Musa Uba. These locations have seen some of the war's most brutal moments, making this week's victories particularly meaningful for military morale. The timing of these strikes is crucial. Intelligence reports suggested these terrorists were planning major attacks on civilian populations along the Baga and Fish Dam axis, areas that have already suffered tremendously from years of insurgency. By intercepting these fighters before they could launch their assault, the Air Force potentially saved countless innocent lives. The Chief of the Air Staff, Air Marshal Sunday Aneke, reaffirmed the NAF's commitment to providing timely and decisive air support to ground forces. Aneke said the operations demonstrated the effectiveness of intelligence-led air power and close air-ground coordination in denying terrorists freedom of action. His words underscore a critical shift in Nigeria's counter-terrorism strategy, moving from reactive responses to proactive, intelligence-driven operations. Yet, even as we celebrate these tactical victories, the broader context reminds us how far we still have to go. The fact that terrorists could mass 40 fighters in canoes for an attack or mount a coordinated assault on a military base with RPGs and heavy weapons shows they maintain significant operational capability despite years of military pressure. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on this ongoing conflict. The human cost of this war extends beyond casualty figures. Damboa local government area where these operations took place has been virtually depopulated in many areas, with residents fleeing to safer zones or living in internally displaced persons camps. Every successful military operation brings hope that someday these communities might return to normal life, but that day still seems distant. What makes this week's operations particularly noteworthy is the seamless coordination between different military branches. When ground troops at Azir came under attack, air support arrived promptly. When intelligence identified terrorist concentrations at Musaram, strikes were authorized and executed swiftly. This kind of joint operation, once rare in the Nigerian military, is becoming the standard approach to counter-terrorism. As the dust settles on these latest strikes, military commanders are already planning their next moves. The armed forces of Nigeria continue efforts to degrade terrorist capabilities and stabilize affected areas. The war against Boko Haram and ISWAP is far from over, but operations like these represent significant steps forward in reclaiming territory and protecting civilian populations from terror. The message to terrorist groups is clear: there is nowhere to hide. Whether on land or water, in forests or urban areas, the combined might of Nigeria's military forces will find and neutralize threats to national security. This week's successful operations in Borno State serve as both a victory and a warning, demonstrating that despite the challenges, Nigeria's military remains capable of delivering devastating blows to those who threaten its peace and stability.